everyone. Welcome to the Diabetes Empowerment Summit. I am Kiana Drew. I am your co-host this season, and we have Dr. Phyllisa Deroze on today. How you doing out there?
I am fine.
That's beautiful. We're so happy to have you here. I want to tell people a little bit about you, and then you can tell us more about your story, because Phyllisa has an amazing story, and I know there are people out there who will be able to become educated on this type of journey. And I'll say it's a journey because that's what diabetes is. It's a long
Yes, it is.
of learning about your body and how to manage it. So Dr. Phyllisa Deroze is a global diabetes patient advocate. She lives in Florida, sunny Florida. She began blogging at diagnosednotdefeated.com almost immediately after you became diagnosed, and that was in 2011.
Yes.
She wears many, many hats, and tell us a bit more about what it is that you're doing today and how you were diagnosed and how you manage your diabetes now.
So I want to add that a year after I started my blog, I also started Black Diabetic Info. This is a website to provide culturally competent information about diabetes, because within that year of being newly diagnosed and searching the World Wide Web, I found an absence of things that were culturally relevant to me. So one being, I wanted to know how to check my blood sugar and how to do different things, but I didn't see images of African Americans doing those things. When it was time for me to figure out how to eat, how to carb count, none of the plates or the images of the foods that I saw represented the foods that I ate. So at some point I was beginning to wonder if managing diabetes required me to disconnect from my culture, right? From my cultural foods, my cultural way of thinking, of being. And a year later, I discovered, no, that's not the case. So I wanted to create that platform because if other people were wondering the same thing, I wanted them to know that you didn't have to stop eating whatever the foods are that you love to manage diabetes. Also, there were a lot of grim statistics, like when you Google African American and diabetes or Black and diabetic, and I wanted people to see a smiling face. So in terms of my advocacy, starting with the blog and then ending up with this website, I then continued along the path of awareness and bringing information to communities that were underserved and ignored. So that's a part of my advocacy journey.
I love that. When I came across your page, I immediately connected because that's something that I felt was lacking in the diabetes community. And there's this misconception when you do go to the doctor and they tell you you can't eat this or you can't eat that, and this is more so what you should eat, and it sounds really boring and plain. And one thing about food, we eat when we're happy, we eat when we're sad, we eat when we celebrate, and especially celebrations. And celebrations are cultural. The way that we celebrate, the way that we come together at the dinner table with family or during the holidays, and we have our particular dishes that have to do with our cultural upbringing. And so you're now going to tell me that I just have to eat salad and vegetables, and now I'm thinking that sounds really bland. You know, how do I eat the way that I'm used to eating? And it's something that you have to learn over time to adapt and to substitute your foods, but you don't have to lose the flavor in your food. And I feel like there wasn't enough information for people of color where we would be able to go and feel supported in that way and led in the right direction as far as how we should eat, or, you know, so, and see smiling faces at that, because diabetes it's not a death sentence, you know, it does not have to be this negative thing. I mean, I would say for you, it's a part of your passion and your purpose, and And that's what it is for me as well.
Yes.
So when you were diagnosed in 2011, you were diagnosed what type? Did you have a type? Did they first just tell you, we think you're diabetic, and then they started to run a series of tests to tell you what type? What was that process like?
Well, I can start with the symptoms. I remember when they started, and they started January 2011, which I have to say, given the way American insurance situations happen, I'm glad it was January, because that December I didn't have insurance. So had all this stuff happened before, it would have been horrible in terms of my financial situation, because I ended up in the hospital for about 6 days with a bill of around $25,000, something like that.
Oh my God.
Fortunately, with insurance, I didn't have to pay all that. So my symptoms started in January. I started feeling tired, thirsty, frequently urinating. My vision was blurred. I actually got fitted for glasses 3 times. So the first time I went was just a routine, like, it's January, I got insurance, it's time for a new pair of glasses.
Right.
And then they were ready maybe like another 2 weeks. So I go back and I can't see. I'm like, this is not my prescription. So the doctor then takes my vision test again, and he's like, yeah, this is sick. Oh, so then he orders them again. I go back another 2 weeks, same thing, like, it is not my prescription. So I was experiencing blurred vision. And then as a professor, I would give lectures in class. Prior to going to the hospital, I remember giving lectures and hearing myself say something that I had no idea where that came from. So, for example, say I was giving a lecture about, let's say, Shakespeare's play Hamlet. And so I'm like, and Shakespeare's play Othello. And I'm like, but we're not talking about Othello. We're talking about Hamlet. But I have no way to stop Othello coming out of my mouth. It's only when I say it and I hear myself say it. And I was like, I have no idea. So I ended up in a lecture correcting myself about 5 times doing that. And I was like, I have no idea why I said that, class. Please don't, write that down. That's incorrect. And I would correct it, but it's like happened. So I had cognitive issues. And then I went to the doctor, and the doctor told me that because I was working out 5 days a week, my electrolytes were off, and she suggested that I drink Gatorade to get my electrolytes up. A week after drinking Gatorade, at the time I was only drinking water, so clearly my blood sugar was already elevated, and now I'm adding sugar. On top of that, Valentine's Day night, I passed out in my bathtub. For an unknown amount of time, it is something that I will live with, knowing that in my life there is a chunk of some hours that I have no accountability for. I have no idea what happened. I just remember waking up and not knowing immediately where I was and having to piece together things. Like, I was like, I'm awake. Where am I? I'm in my bathroom. I'm in the bathtub. Like, how did I get to the bathtub? Like, it was just this slow kind of awareness after passing out. It was then I knew something was wrong. I knew Gatorade was not the cure for whatever was wrong with me. And so I go back to the doctor, and when I go back to her, my glucose doesn't register. And her assistant, she rushes out the room. Her assistant whispers to me, your glucose isn't registering, and that's not a good thing. I then go berserk, because I don't know what glucose means. I don't know what not registering means. I just know someone whispering something to me is just not a good thing. And so I immediately called my mom, who's a nurse, and I said, Mom, they said my glucose isn't registering, and that's not a good thing. Like, what's going on? Like, these people are whispering. One ran out the door. And my mom was like, no, go to the emergency room now. My mom, thankfully, was a nurse a diabetes nurse. So she knew some of these things, although I was living in North Carolina. My first year as a professor, my mom was in Florida. She says, no, like, go to the emergency room. The doctor is insistent upon giving me an injection, which now I presume was insulin.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got to the emergency room, I couldn't walk and my blood sugar was 603. So that 603 after a shot of insulin, how many units, again, I have no idea. They didn't tell me anything. I actually had to sign a waiver to go to the emergency room because she believed that I was not a case for the emergency room. I was, again, clearly in DKA. They did not know what type of diabetes I had. I was given pamphlets for both type 1 and type 2. And once I was given those pamphlets for both type 1 and type 2, I was told that I would know once I was discharged that they would not have tests back in less than 10 days, and I was in the hospital for 6 days. So after I followed up with my endocrinologist, I was told that I had type 2 diabetes, and I've been living that way for the past 8 years. Last September, I was diagnosed with having LADA, latent autoimmune diabetes in adults. It is a form of type 1 diabetes. And so I've spent 8 years being misdiagnosed with the wrong type of diabetes.
That's incredible. And the whole time you were living as a type 2, which the management of your glucose is different a lot of times. You're on pills, maybe metformin or some insulin, or just metformin. So I'm
See,
curious.
I lived 3 years, well, almost 3 years without anything. So of course, DKA, you need insulin. So I was on insulin, and then within 9 months, I went from insulin, metformin, insulin and metformin, a GLP-1, until within 9 months, I was off everything. And so my A1C was a consistent 5.5, 5.4, managing with diet and exercise. Then I moved abroad. I actually blamed my high A1C on moving abroad. I was like, I moved abroad and now I can't, nothing had food labels like when I moved abroad. So carb counting was just extremely difficult. But now I know it was not to move abroad, and it was in fact part of what happens when you have LADA. It's just a slow progression of the beta cells, being attacked by the antibodies. And it's also one of the things that, here's the thing, if I could say to anyone who is diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, I would tell them, ask to have the antibodies test done. The way I was diagnosed, I was in the hospital. I spent 8 years under the care of 3 or 4 different endocrinologists. I would have assumed I had every test done, but that's not the case. And so how this came to my knowledge is, fortunately, I've become a global diabetes advocate. But if I hadn't, I don't know what was going to happen. So I had the privilege of sharing my diagnosis story in a room full of diabetes specialists from the MENA region. So Middle East, Africa, Asia, North Africa, Asia. And once I shared my diagnosis story, mind you, this room of people never saw an A1C from me. They never saw my blood work. They never saw nothing. They only heard my story. They listened. And when I shared my diagnosis story, the question of 1.5 came up. Have you heard about 1.5? It sounds like you have 1.5 and, not type 2. And I was like, well, I've heard of 1.5 in passing, right? Especially because two of my favorite diabetes buddies, Mike and Sharice, have had this diagnosis of LADA in 1.5. So I knew something, but I really was not as educated clearly as I am today. And so at lunch, this one woman, she's adamant. She's like, you really need to find out if you have LADA. And don't stop until you get the answers. So I'm like, okay, all right, I got it. You know, like, calm down, lady. But she was just, I mean, it was for my better good. But what I didn't know is when she said to me, don't stop until you get the answer, is I believe this woman knew it was going to be a fight. I didn't know. I just thought, oh, okay, well, the next time I see my doctor, I'll just ask for the testing. It didn't work that way. I was immediately told, no, there's no need to get tested. Clearly, you have type 2. That was World Diabetes Day 2018. I had already noticed that there was an elevation in my A1C January 2018. And I tried to talk to my doctor then. I was like, I'm noticing an incline in my A1C, you know, and I'm real tight with where I want it to be. So I'm not a person that's okay with the 8, you know, some people are, I'm just not one of those people. So I'm looking at a trend. I'm like, over the past couple of months, we've just been going up and up, and I'm not okay with that. Her thing was to give me more medication, some medications I should never have been on, having antibodies, but that's another story. So she says, no, you're type 2. That's World Diabetes Day 2018. So 3 months later, now we're 2019, I say, well, can you look at my records and see if I ever had the testing done? She looks, no, you've never had the testing done. And I'm like, yes, let's do the testing. Nope, there's no need. You have type 2. Another 3 months go by, because I'm now thinking about this lady telling me, you need to find out. And I have to say, honestly, I was thinking, I'm just going to get a piece of paper to say I have type 2 and like prove this lady wrong. That's what I'm thinking, because I've been living with type 2 for 8 years, right? Yes. So I was thinking that I was just going to get a piece of paper and prove the lady wrong. Like, see, really here, I do have type 2. No, it didn't work that way. So another 3 months go by. I asked a different endocrinologist, listen, I know I didn't have the testing done. I would like to have the antibodies tested. The GAT, by this time I know the GAT65 antibody test is what I want. And not only am I told no, I am told no in a way that makes me feel, because I only know how I felt, makes me feel that the endocrinologist felt as though I was challenging his knowledge by me asking for an antibody testing, to the point where he said, I don't think your insurance is going to pay for it, and then you'll have to pay for it out of pocket. And to that I said, I don't have any problem paying out of pocket. I want to know. To that he replied, no. So I didn't get testing then. That was May 2019. I went away for a summer vacation and was sick as a dog. My blood sugar was through the roof. There was nothing I could do because my endocrinologist believed I had type 2. They didn't give me insulin. I just had some, I don't know, some oral pills that were just not doing anything. And I lost about 25 pounds last summer, just in a very quick amount of time. I was vomiting. It was just absolutely horrible. I probably was in DKA, you know, towards the lower numbers, maybe around 300. So I then go back home and I see my OBGYN, and I explain to my OBGYN what the situation is. I want to be tested. She tests me. She agrees to do the test. She's like, Phyllisa.
Wait a second. I feel you had your OB say yes to you. This isn't even an endocrinologist. But the difference
and that's what she said.
Will she listen to you? And, you know, I would like to get a doctor's perspective. I really want to understand why doctors just shut you down. When you ask them, can you actually look into this? Because we've taken the time to do our own research, and we want to make sure that we cover all the bases, and we present that to them, and they just tell us no. They either assume we don't have the money to pay for it, or they assume that the insurance company won't pay for it. And so sometimes I feel like maybe they don't want to fight on our behalf enough, because there is a struggle sometimes between the doctor ordering something and the insurance company saying no, and it takes the doctor having to continue to see you, write up notes, and fight on their behalf to get them to pay for it. And I feel like maybe they're inundated with patients, or they just kind of want to wait until it's so bad that now they have to. Where if they've done it earlier, you wouldn't have been in the situation that you were in for so long, where you were actually in deep KA, where your life was in danger because they would not listen to you.
No.
That's just awful.
No.
And you had that antibody.
So yeah, she did it. She was just like, she just said, listen, I'm not endocrine. That's not my specialty. And I was like, please. So we were literally looking it up on the internet, like the actual code for the testing. We were on like Google, because it's not her area. We found the code. She called downstairs and asked. 2 weeks later, the results came back through the roof. Through the roof. They had been retested at the testing center. It said results verified by retesting. Wow. That is just how astronomical they were. The scale for GAT65 is 0 to 5. I had greater than 7,000 antibodies.
Wow. And so the criteria for being diagnosed with LADA is, what is that testing? You just gave a
So
number.
it's the presence of antibodies. So when we get to our types, it's very interesting because it's type 1, type 2. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like it to a degree, right? We have gestational, and then we have pre-diabetes and these things. But the big umbrellas are type 1 and type 2. So, and that simply means on one hand, the presence of antibodies, or you don't have the presence of antibodies. So the presence of antibodies that are attacking the beta cells means really type 1. It's just that people like me who have LADA, it's the latent onset, like that beginning of the LADA, the latent autoimmune. Like, so the slow progression of the antibodies ultimately killing off the insulin production of the beta cells. So in my case, it took 8 years for me to reach a place where I am now insulin dependent. And the thing is it could have been longer than 8 years had I not been given medication that I should never have been on because I was misdiagnosed. So this is the harm in the misdiagnosis. I should have had antibody testing done when I was diagnosed in the first place, understanding that that's a marker, right? Like that's really the divide. Mm-hmm. So my advice for people who are diagnosed with type 2 is ask for antibody testing and keep asking. I would love to ask a physician and an endocrinologist why was there so much resistance? And apparently it's so prevalent, the resistance, that this woman took time to tell me, don't stop until you get the answer. Mm-hmm. You know?
Wow. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I'm actually going to interview Sharice, who has LADA. Yeah. So I'm interested to hear how she came about with her diagnosis. I don't know too much about it. I just know she's the other person that I do know in our community that has LADA. But I'm not
yeah, I think the interesting thing about my story that will differ from Sharice's is that she was never misdiagnosed. Mm. So she always knew she had LADA and that eventually she would become insulin dependent, right? My issue with being misdiagnosed is that I began to think about all the people who have been misdiagnosed, but just were told that they were non-compliant. They were not taking their medication properly. There, literally last summer, there was nothing I could do, nothing that I could take that my endo had given me that was bringing my blood sugar down. I got to the point where I just stopped eating. I was eating collard greens and air, salad, collard greens and air. That was it. I wasn't eating anything because I was like, these are the only two things that I know are not going to raise my blood sugar, because it was just up and it wasn't going down. Right. And so I have to say I have mourned. I have mourned for myself. I have mourned for people I've known who have passed away, because I think to myself, what if this person never had type 2? Right. But they were just told that they were not managing their diabetes properly. They were, non-compliant, like all these horrible things. And then they just gave up, right? So whatever they were given wasn't taking their blood sugar down. And they were trying to eat right, and their blood sugar still wasn't going down. They were doing all these things, and nothing was working for them, and they just gave up. They didn't know to ask for antibody testing. They never heard of a GAD65. They didn't have a DOC community that they could ask. And they left here like that. Sometimes it just gets to me. I find myself in a corner. Sometimes I'm still processing, and I just be like, God damn, 8 years?
Yeah, that is so
8 years.
That is so, I can only imagine the absolute frustration. I mean, I was immediately diagnosed type 1, and I know the frustration of just trying to figure out how to now navigate your blood sugars. And it's like you're a walking science experiment. So you're just trying out all things. You're doing your own basal test, because every diabetic is different. So you're trying to figure out your carb to insulin ratios. What is your basal? What should your bolus be? And then what do certain foods do to you? So I can only imagine if you're misdiagnosed, and so you're thinking that you have the foundation and the tools to navigate it, but that's the wrong way to do it. You just give up, that's so unfortunate for people.
But you know what, I do want to say this. And this is very important for our diabetes community at large, no matter what type you have, no matter what angle you take it from, if you are living with diabetes, if you're a caretaker, if you're an endocrinologist, whomever. I want this to be known. The first time I opened a diabetes pamphlet, educational material, a book, anything that tells me how to manage diabetes, and it said, it is not your fault, it was when I was reading something about type 1. I have never read those words on anything dealing with type 2. And that's very unfortunate. That is very unfortunate. I remember when, now given all this type 1 diabetes information, and I read that in the first paragraph, I just broke down crying. I just broke down, because I thought, like, for 8 years I've been reading information about diabetes, dealing with diabetes stigma, and why have I never read those words? It is not your fault.
Right. And that's what you're out here to tell people. It is not your fault, and to share your story and to tell other people, don't stop looking for the answers. Just keep going until you can't quit. Until you, right.
Yeah.
Just keep looking for the answers. Wow.
And you are diagnosed, not defeated. You hear me?
Right. You are diagnosed, not defeated. I love that, by the way. I love that. And I use your hashtag sometimes too.
Please, all the time, honey. It's our hashtag.
Yes. I want to ask one last question. And this is something that Oprah does. She asks people, what do you know for sure?
What do I know for sure? What I know for sure is that no matter how hard things get, they will get better. And that's what I know for sure. I've had many, many, many valleys. We've not even talked about 60 days after I had been diagnosed with diabetes. I lost my home in a tornado. So I didn't have anything. I didn't have clothes. I didn't have needles. I didn't have anything you can think of. A bra, some panties, toothpaste, whatever, a brush. I had nothing. And it got better. I have had a child. I think about going through an entire pregnancy misdiagnosed, and it hurts, but it got better. And so even now I'm going through a personal struggle, and I just remind myself it gets better. So that's the one thing I know for sure, that no matter how hard it is, and sometimes it does get hard. Sometimes I can't even pray for myself. I got to tell a friend, listen, I need you to pray for me because I'm so low, baby, I can't even pray for myself. It will get better.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So for you viewers out there, remember that no matter how bad it gets, it will get better. You know, keep going. Thank you so much for being a part
Thank you
of
for
the
having me.
Empowerment Summit. And I'm so excited I got to interview you. This is awesome.
This was a pleasure.
Yes. So you have a blessed day.
You
And
too.
I just want to let everyone know there are several other interviews, and stay tuned. We have more empowering stories to share, inspiration and hope for your journey. Thank you. Bye,
Bye.
Lisa.